Hello and welcome back to the channel. In the previous video, we looked at classes and objects. In this video, we're going to be looking at control structures. Control structures are ways we control the flow of our program. We're going to be looking at two categories of control structures: selection statements and repetition statements. Selection statements are used to make decisions in our code. If a certain condition is true, we execute one part of our code, and if it's not, we execute another part of our code. We've already seen one selection statement before, that is the if statement, and now we're going to be looking at the remaining selection statement, which is the switch statement. The switch statement has the same functionality as a series of else-if statements, so it's basically used to check multiple conditions. To see this, we're going to create a new class. We're going to call it days of the week. And since we're going to be running the program, we're going to tick public static void main. So the program that we're going to be building is going to take in a number from 1 till 7, where 1 represents Monday, 2 represents Tuesday, and so on. So our program is going to convert the number format to the word format. So if we give it 1, it's going to give us Monday. If we give it 3, it's going to give us Wednesday. First, we're going to declare a variable of type int, and it's going to be called day. So this is going to be the number format of the day. Initially, we can set it equal to 3. So our program should return Wednesday. Now, how we use switch statements is first we write switch, and in parentheses, we put in a variable name that we want to compare to different values. In our case, we want to compare the day variable, so we're going to say day. And in curly braces, we're going to have different cases. So the first case we're going to have is if day is equal to 1. So if day is equal to 1, we want to print out Monday. And then we're going to have a break statement. Later on, we're going to see why this break statement is important. Next, we're going to have case 2. And in that case, we're going to print out Tuesday. And again, we're going to have our break statement. Then we're going to have case 3. And we're going to print out Wednesday. Another break statement. Then we're going to have case 4. And we're going to print out Thursday. And another break statement. And we're going to have case 5. And we're going to print out Friday. Another break statement. Then we're going to have case 6. And we're going to print out Saturday. Another break statement, and we're going to have the final case, which is case 7. And we're going to print out Sunday. And we're going to have our break statement. Now, one more thing we can do is if there is no matching case, we can run a default case. So to do that, we're going to have default, and we're going to print out invalid day. So what is happening here is we have a day variable, and we're going to compare it to each case value. So if day is 1, we're going to execute this block of code. If day is 2, we're going to execute this block of code. And we're going to go on until day 7. And if day is a number that is not in the cases, so for example, if we had 8, then our switch statement is going to go to the default case and execute the print statement. Now to see this, we're going to save our program and run our code. As you can see, we get Wednesday displayed. If we set day to 2, for example, and save our file and run our code, we get Tuesday. If we set day to an invalid day of the week, for example, if we put in 8, if we save our file and run our code, we get invalid day. Next, we're going to see why the break statements are important. To see this, we're going to remove the break statement from case 1, and we're going to set our day variable to 1. Now, what we expect to be displayed is Monday, but if we save our file and run our code, we get both Monday and Tuesday. So if we don't put in a break statement, it's going to go to the next case and it's going to execute the statement until it reaches a break statement. So that is why it is important to include a break statement in each case. The next control structure we're going to be looking at is repetition. We use repetition when we want to repeat a certain piece of code multiple times. To see this, we're going to go back to our gradebook class, which we wrote in the previous video. So our gradebook class currently has different methods, and the last method we have is the display message method. And now we're going to add one more method. So inside our class, we're going to define public void determine class average, and we're going to have empty parentheses because our method is not going to take in any input, and we're going to have a block of code. So what this method is going to do is it's going to get different grades from the user, and it's going to calculate the average of those grades. So since we're going to be taking input, we need to have a scanner object, and we're going to call it input, and we're going to set it equal to new scanner system.in. We're getting an error here. That is because we haven't imported scanner. So we're going to import it now. So we're going to have import java.util.scanner. And we're going to go back to our method. To calculate an average, the first thing we need is going to be a total variable. And we're going to set it initially to 0. Next, we're going to have a variable called grade counter. Again, we're going to set it to 0. What this variable is going to do is it's going to count the number of grades that the user enters. And we're going to also have a variable called grade. This is going to actually store the user's input. And finally, we're going to have an average. So since average is going to be a decimal value, we're going to store it in a double called average. The next step is going to be prompting the user to enter a grade. We can do that using system.out.print, and we're going to prompt them to enter a grade or -1 to quit. So what this is going to do is it's going to tell them to enter a grade, and if they enter -1, that means they've finished entering grades, and it's going to calculate the average. And to take their input, we're going to use the input object, and we're going to have next int, and we're going to store it in the grade variable. Now, the problem with this program is it's going to only ask them to enter a grade once, but in our case, we want to ask them multiple times until they enter -1. So to accomplish this, we're going to be using what is called a while loop. So how a while loop works is we're going to have a while, and in parentheses, we're going to have a condition. If this condition is true, everything in the while loop is going to continue executing again and again. But when the condition is false, we're going to break out of the while loop. In our case, we want to continue the while loop as long as grade is not equal to -1. So in our while loop, first we're going to add whatever the user entered to our total variable. To do that, we're going to have total is equal to whatever total was previously plus the grade that the user entered. Now there's a simpler way to writing this statement. Instead of writing total twice, what we can do is remove the second total, and we can have plus equal. So this is the same statement as before. It's going to add the grade variable to the total variable. Next, once we add it to the total, we also want to update our grade counter. So to do that, we're going to have grade counter plus equal 1. Again, there's a shorthand that we can use for updating a variable by 1, and that is using plus plus. What we want to do next in our loop is ask the user to enter a grade again. So we're going to use our print statement again. we're going to prompt them to enter a grade or -1 to quit. And we're going to store their entered grade inside the grade variable. So this is going to be the end of our while loop. So as long as the user doesn't input -1, we're going to ask them to enter a grade again and again, and we're going to be adding that grade to the total and updating our grade counter. Outside our while loop, we're going to calculate the average. So we're going to have average is equal to total divided by grade counter. Here, there's one more thing we need to do. Currently, total is of type int, and grade counter is also of type int. So in Java, when you divide an integer by an integer, you're going to get an integer result. But in our case, we want average to have a decimal value. So we need to change one of our operands to double. To do that, we're going to do something called casting. We simply have a parentheses before the variable that we want to cast to a different type. In our case, we're going to cast total to double. So we're going to have parentheses, and in parentheses, we're going to type in double. And now if we divide a double by an integer, we're going to get a double result. And once we've done that, we're going to print the average out. So we're going to have system.out.printf. First, we're going to print out the total of the grade. So we're going to have total of the %d grades entered is, followed by a %d and a new line. And in the first %d, we want to substitute grade counter. And in the second %d, we want to substitute total. And finally, we're going to end our statement. Next, we're going to print out the average. So we're going to have system.out.printf. And we're going to say class average is %f. So the placeholder for a decimal value is %f. And we're going to have our new line character. And in the %f, we're going to substitute average. When displaying decimal values using printf, one thing you can do is adjust the precision. So here, if we add a .2, this is going to make sure that we only have 2 digits after the decimal place. Now we can save this file and go to our gradebook test class. And we're going to comment out the code we had previously. And we're going to create a gradebook object. We're going to call it my gradebook. And we're going to set it equal to new gradebook. And in parentheses, we have to pass in a course name. So we're going to give it Introduction to Java. Once we've created the object, we can access the determine class average method. So we're going to have my gradebook dot determine class average. Now we can save this file and run our program. It's going to ask us to enter a grade. Let's put in 98. It's going to ask us again. Let's put in 74. It's going to keep asking us until we enter -1. Let's add one more grade. Let's put in 100. Let's press enter. And to end the while loop and calculate our average, we're going to enter -1. And if we press enter, we get the total of the 3 grades and we get the class average. The remaining 2 repetition statements we're going to be looking at are for loops and do while loops. First, let's look at the for loop. We're going to create a new class and we're going to call it for loop. And since we're going to be running this class, we're going to tick public static void main and we're going to press on finish. So a for loop has the same purpose as a while loop. The difference is that we usually use a for loop when we know how many times our code is going to repeat. In our previous example, we did not know how many grades the user might enter, so we used a while loop. But we use a for loop when we know how many times our program is going to repeat. So the syntax to using a for loop is we're going to have a for, And in parentheses, first we're going to have an initializing statement. This is going to initialize a variable. So let's have int counter, and we're going to set it equal to 1. So this is the initializing statement. Next, we're going to have a condition. As long as this condition is true, our for loop is going to continue. In our case, we're going to have as long as counter is less than or equal to 10. And finally, we're going to have an updating statement. This is going to update the variable inside our for loop. In our case, it's going to update the counter variable. And we're going to increase the counter variable by 1 each time the loop repeats. So this is the syntax to using a for loop. Inside our for loop, we're going to simply print out the counter variable. We can do that using a printf statement. So we're going to have %d space, and in the %d, we're going to substitute counter. Now if we save our file and run our code, we get the numbers from 1 till 10 displayed to our terminal. The final repetition statement we're going to be looking at is a do-while loop. So we're going to create a new class, and we're going to call it do-while. And since it's going to be executed, we're going to tick public static void main, and we're going to press on finish. A do-while loop is similar to the other repetition statements. What makes it different is that at least it's going to run once, whether or not the condition is false. So to see how a do-while loop is written, we're going to have a counter, and we're going to set it to 1, and we're going to have do, and in curly braces, we're going to have a block of code. In our case, we're going to print out the counter variable. And we're going to update the value of our counter by 1 each time the loop repeats. And once we've finished writing our block of code, we're going to have while, and in parentheses, we're going to have our condition. In our case, we're going to have while counter is less than or equal to 10. So this is going to execute the same as our for loop. The difference between a normal while loop and a do-while loop is that in a do-while loop, we first execute the statements, then after are we going to check the condition inside the while loop. But when we are using a normal while loop, we're going to check the condition first, then we're going to execute the statements. So if we save this file and run our code, we get the numbers from 1 till 10. The final concept we're going to be looking at in this section are 2 keywords that are used to control our loops. And these keywords are break and continue. To see how these keywords work, we're going to go back to our for loop. The first keyword we're going to look at is the break keyword. So we've already seen break before when we were dealing with switch statements. And when it comes to loops, it also has the same functionality. We use the break statement when we want to exit out of our loop before the loop condition is met. So to see this inside our for loop, we're going to have an if condition. And we're going to say if counter is equal to 5, then we want to break. So what is going to happen here is counter is going to start from 1, it's going to get displayed, it's going to go all the way up to 4, and in the next iteration when counter is 5, it's going to go inside this if statement and it's going to see the break statement. And when it sees the break statement, it's going to exit out of our for loop. So the output we're going to have is the numbers from 1 till 4. So if we save our file and run our code, we get the numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. The next keyword is the continue keyword. We use the continue keyword when we want to skip the current iteration or the current repetition. So if we go to our if statement and if we change the break statement to a continue, what is going to happen here is the numbers from 1 till 4 get printed out, and when counter is equal to 5, it's going to skip the current iteration. That means 5 is not going to get printed out, and it's going to go to the next iteration, and counter becomes 6. So what this is going to do is it's going to print the numbers from 1 till 4, it's going to skip 5, and it's going to print the numbers from 6 till 10. So if we save our file and run our code, we get the numbers from 1 till 10, excluding 5. So that's it for this section. In the next video, we're going to be looking at methods in more depth. Thank you for watching this video, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more programming content.